All right. My name is Manuel Divino. I'm a junior at Sarah Lawrence College, and I'm sitting here with Jane Jeong Trenka and Jong Sook Nee. We're going to have a conversation about transnational adoption from South Korea. If you guys want to talk about yourselves a little bit, sort of introduce yourselves.
My name is Jong Sook. I was adopted when I was about 3 or 4 by a family that lives in Peoria, Illinois. It's where I grew up. I'm now an attorney, and I live in New Jersey.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Jane Trenka, and I live in Korea. I'm adopted, and I grew up in Minnesota, and I tried to do some things for the adoption issue for a while, and then I became a single mom, and now I just sell insurance.
Wow. We'll have to talk.
Make some money.
A single mom with tea for a bit.
Say that. Oh, what? Say that again.
I said we'll have to talk afterwards because I was a single mom with tea for a little bit.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, we were very close as a result of that.
Wow.
That's as evidenced by this interview in the first place. But
so you walked through fire too, huh?
Felt that way, right? Well, I didn't move to Korea, so you really added an extra layer of difficulty to it, but that would have been amazing.
So I think something I want to start with is a very simple, broad question that is difficult for me to answer through books and reading all these scholars' opinions and everything. And it's the idea, having lived through the adoption process, regardless of how little or how much memory you have of it, are there things about it that you feel are, explicitly or maybe less explicitly illegal about it? Like things that you feel are just inhumane or shouldn't be allowed? To clarify, I do bring this up because of the amendment to the Adoption Special Law of 2011, just because that's, in my research, that's been such an incredibly important moment for adoptees sort of, speaking up for themselves. And I want to know what other progress we can be making.
Wow. Okay, so here's the part where there's so much in my head, it's kind of hard to get started because it's which one of these 1,000 things should I start with? But okay, so maybe just a little bit of background about the special adoption law. So the special adoption law was created during the Park Chung-hee military dictatorship in Korea in the 1960s. And so before the special adoption law, there was no way that a foreigner could adopt a child. Actually, we had no such thing in Korea as child adoption. We were, traditionally Koreans would adopt because they wanted somebody to inherit their property. So they would adopt their nephew, somebody like that, if they didn't have a son in their family. And then, there's circulation of children to relatives, or horrible treatment of children as to be used as household labor or something like that. There was this kind of thing going on, but this adoption process that we have now was invented in the 1960s under this special adoption law that was specifically made so that children could be adopted to foreigners. So it's kind of this sort of false construct in the first place. It's just this fake thing that was added on so they could facilitate this. And before, under civil adoption, under the civil code, you couldn't send the firstborn son of a child out for adoption because the son had a special place. But under the special adoption law, you could. But anyway, we know what we know, and we found all of these things in the law because these things all happened, right? And they happened to people that we love and care about. So I had a friend who was adopted, who is dead now, who there's no way under the civil law he would have been adopted at all because he was the first son. I guess, there's illegal, and then there's just wrong, legal, but clearly wrong things that happen. okay, the reason why I gave that whole preface was because lots of times people think that we made the special adoption law in Korea in 2011, and we didn't. It was there for a long time, and we just tried to polish a turd, and like at the time, and even until I think maybe a couple of weeks ago, actually a couple of weeks ago, I didn't really understand what a turd this special adoption law was. And I felt like, well, this is the thing that we have to handle. This is the thing that we can touch and that we can fix, and that's why we should fix it. But right now, I'm kind of convinced that maybe it should be more like abolished, because what the special adoption law did is it completely it's an instrument of discrimination, and it completely discriminates against one population of children against another. So in Korea, you know, we have child protective services in the United States. In Korea, we don't have intervention like that. And so what happens is if a parent or family member wants to get rid of a child, whatever they do is what happens to the child. So I think probably there would be in a county, in a state county, there would be some kind of intervention and some kind of counseling before a child is put into foster care or parental rights are cut or something like that. But in Korea, if you want to drop off your kid at an orphanage, go ahead. Just do that. In Korea, if you want to drop off your kid at an adoption agency, go ahead. You just do that. If you want to stick them in the baby box because you want to anonymously abandon and you happen to be like somebody's boyfriend and you just have this baby, go ahead and do it. So there's like no intervention.
It's certainly a historical thing that's built into the culture based on years of that being okay. Do you think there's room in the culture? Do you think there's a place where people would be accepting of a different regime where intervention would be acceptable?
I think yes, and it's the duty of the government to lead the people. I mean, we're kind of frogs in a well. Actually, we live on an island because North Korea. So actually, we live on this island. So Korea has signed the Hague Convention on intercountry adoption, but they have not ratified it. And the reason why is because they do not have this government intervention. They don't have any way to kind of like sort out kids and figure out what's right for them from the get-go. And so that's the whole reason. And so like Korea helped to design the Hague Convention. They signed it more than 20 years ago and then left that line blank for 20 years, and they haven't ratified it. So if we just look at what they're doing, like the government thinks it's right.
Yeah.
So it's their job to like stop making these excuses, which it's always like about, oh, but we're Confucian. It's like, no, you're confusion. It's confusion, not Confucianism. Stop making excuses and like lead the people with the law. You know, like did we end Jim Crow in the United States because people wanted that? You know?
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the role of government, right? I mean, it is an appropriate place to set regulations, to set expectations, and then behavior will follow. Can I ask, does it remain an economic engine in Korea, the adoption, kind of the adoption train out?
Okay, so short answer, no. I don't think so. I think they probably lose money on international adoption, but they get more out of it than money. And just to go back to that, like it was an economic engine and they did need to have US dollars. And I did hear from a friend who is European. They asked in the 1970s when she was adopted to send the money in American dollars. They didn't want their European money. They wanted dollars.
Wow.
Right? So there was that.
Yeah.
But I think they're losing money on it now. But what else do they get besides money? They get clout. They get social clout. They get everybody to say, oh, look at such and such. Yeah, such and such agency is so wonderful. Look at the good work that they do. And it's kind of like a flagship program.
Wow. God, it's depressing.
So, I mean, you mentioned a little bit ago the fact that it's, you know, the government's responsibility to lead the people. And that same government in South Korea is one that's really like said like all the adoptees are overseas nationals and we want everyone to come back and visit your homeland and et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering what the general feeling is from the adopted community, is about the South Korean government, and in particular, things like the government establishing, I believe in 1995, saying, hey, we're going to decide whether or not to end or continue Korean adoption, definitively on this date. And then they pushed that date back to 2015, and then it's now 2020, and that discussion never actually happened. With those sort of mismanagements from the South Korean government, I wonder if there's a general sense of betrayal from the adopted community, or if those don't really play a factor.
When we talk about adopted community, there's a bunch of adoptees, right? And we all like to think independently, and kind of it's hard to get us all get all our noses pointed in the same direction, right? It's just like herding cats. So it's really hard to say what adopted community feels about this. And I think probably a lot of people don't even know that at many different junctures, the Korean government had said they're going to end adoption and international adoption. Even when I was here, we had a minister who had decided that he was going to end adoption, and it was after the murder of the Supal children. So I don't know if you remember the Supal kids from Iowa, I think their dad's name was James Supal. He killed his whole family. And I think there were 4 adopted children there. And at that time, the minister said, we were going to end this. And then he was canned for like a completely different reason, but they got rid of that minister and away went the plan. And so, so I don't think everybody knows about all of these little things, but I mean, there are definitely adoptees who are like super, why am I looking for good? Super pro-adoption, and they really think that adoption from Korea should continue, and it shouldn't be about nationality, it shouldn't be about ethnicity. It's like every child needs a home, and this should continue as long as it's needed. And then there are other people who are just like, heck no, like this should not continue. And then there are like other people in between who are like, well, if you slice it and dice it, it should be, So I think it's hard to say what the community feels like. I don't know. What's your sense of it, Jong Sook?
I think, I think the government's not leading, but it very much strikes me that there's a cultural jam somewhere. There's something very shameful, and this is actually what I was very interested in learning more about it, because I don't live in Korea, so it strikes me that there continues to be this very huge obstacle culturally for keeping the children in, because I think it's a national shame that so many children have been adopted out, but at the same time, it continues to be much worse to be a single mother, to be to have this child, and they've gotten very used to this option of, jettisoning their children, and there being very few repercussions, or at least networks, to kind of help people process this massive loss of, I guess, people and identity. And I can't figure it out. I'm interested because, like you said, this minister was let go. So like, why is that such a negative rallying cry to end mass adoption out of our country? Why is that such a negative thing culturally, that we don't want people espousing that value? No, I'm not saying that government can't take the lead. It just sounds like the government sort of feeling the environment and sort of saying, I mean, it's obviously a deeper issue than just adopting one's child. It's probably has so much more to do with the lack of social services for anyone who has a child. Could go all the way back to like a program, not talking about sex education enough. I don't know. I'm interested in that part, Jane.
Well, yeah, so I'm trying to say push factors and pull factors, and there are many of them. And I suppose it's cultural, and it's habit, and it's the United States is greedy for children.
Yeah.
Like, there's a person in the State Department who's like, one of their jobs is to like fly around the world kind of shopping for babies for Americans. So I met her.
You did?
Yeah. And so this is, that was a crass way to put it. but you know, like something blah blah diplomacy blah blah, blah the children yeah. Anyway, so they're just interested, like, can we get some more kids from the orphanages? Like, how can we, you know, make sure these kids get into homes and whatever, you know? So I ate dinner with your American tax dollars. It was like some steak and some sushi and stuff with these people because, you know, they really want people who can sort of break it down for them and tell them, you know, like what's going on with the Korean government. Why are they kind of tightening the screws? Why are they not letting, you know, because they have been trying to cut back, but there's this enormous pull from Western countries.
Wow. And maybe that goes to T's question of legality versus morality. And I think there's a real problem, not just in Korea, but in America. Kind of, we want what we want, and we think money and a good, solid middle class upbringing is really attractive. And these poor, I do think in Korea, like, we're viewed as poor little nothings that were being clutched out of poverty and destitution. And America is great. And I do think there's that mythology, and I think that's immoral, because I don't think our parents are really placing them. I don't think parents are being educated enough, and our government's not helping parents prepare people for. I mean, we don't even prepare people for parenthood, period. But an interracial adoption, even a domestic interracial adoption, they're not prepared for it. An international adoption, I can't imagine the advice is getting.
Yeah, doesn't it just make your heart so sad? I mean, like when I had my own child, like that was hard enough, and I can explain things because I know where this comes from because she came out of my body. I can, you know, like, I'm a single mom. People know I'm a single mom. Like, people talk trash in front of me sometimes. Like, okay, whatever.
In Korea?
Yeah. You know, like, there's discrimination. I felt it. It happened right in front of me. And, you know, like, luckily I'm almost 50. So I'm like, yeah, blow it out your hole. I don't care. But like, if I would be a 20-year-old single mom, I would be really hurt.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, yeah, whatever. And also culturally, I'm not Korean. So like, I kind of don't care. But I mean, so my kid is growing up, the only discrimination really against her, I suppose, would be that, like, people know that her mom is a single mom. But there's not racial discrimination, you know, she doesn't stick out like a white giraffe.
Yeah. Or a yellow giraffe in a white giraffe zoo. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I really feel for these kids who are, you know, thrown into a homeschooling environment in the middle of Texas, and nobody sees them until, you know, something horrible happens. Their parents aren't given any information. Just like, what a disaster for everybody. All this rehoming, like, come on, it's terrible.
So in the same vein as that, there's this idea of, like, you know, Christian Americanism in adoption studies, which, you know, just very broad strokes is like the white Christians in America back in like the 70s and 80s, like, were really galvanized by nationalist and religious and moral ideas to adopt Korean children, even though a lot of them, you know, were not necessarily prepared to welcome interracial kids into their homes. And I think, you know, since I'm speaking with two adoptees who were adopted into the Midwest of America, especially, I'm wondering what's your sense of how ethical it is, you know, how ethical that adoption process in itself is, of all of these white American Christian families saying it's our national and religious duty to God to welcome these children into our homes, even though they didn't really consider what that means.
I grew up in a very Methodist tradition, and I feel very lucky in the sense that it was a very open tradition. Like, it wasn't like somewhere it was, we love everyone except for the gays. We love everyone except for this. It actually didn't have an asterisk at the end. So the way I was raised was very much like, no, we love everyone, and even if it's hard, we'll try to love them. You know, we'll do our best. So I'm deeply appreciative of that, and I think I've sort of got this narrow slice of a very positive view of religion. That being said, I think a lot of very terrible things are done in the name of religion. I mean, I think religion is just a light for some people, and how you get there is multiple ways, and how you use that light can be very extremely negative. It can be very harmful. And I think that's an example of this sort of missionary mentality of, you know, we're great, we're awesome, let's shine our light on these poor, and there really is this classist or north-south sort of mentality of, I'm going to bring education, I'm going to bring Christianity, I'm going to bring morality to you. And instead of the missionaries going to Korea and colonize and creating and spreading Christianity, they brought Korea to them. And that same sort of mentality of, I'm bringing you up out of squalor. I really do feel that it is part of that missionary zeal, that evangelical sort of thing, which can be very, the word isn't classist, but the word is very much patronizing or something. Do you know what I mean?
Are you looking for the word batshit crazy?
Three words, but yes, maybe that's what it was.
Be like, Holt, come on. Like, that was just batshit crazy, right? Like, he saw that newsreel and he felt like God was calling him, and then he like pick out some random verse from the Bible and just start
and brought 12
thing.
children back the first time.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I don't get it.
Can we talk about Holt for a little bit? I feel like that's a really important thing that I never get to talk with other people about. Because for me, like, when I first started getting into adoption studies, I was like, oh, Holt's the reason that my mother is in this country, so it must be great. And they still work. They're still like the biggest international adoption agency. And then the moment you start reading about them and like what the early practices were in particular, like, I was horrified by certain things. So, I mean, what are your just general senses of Holt as an organization?
Well, you know, I'm not from Holt. I have horrifying things to say about my own adoption agency, Korea Social Service. But I mean, like, Holt obviously, well, people think that Holt started it, and actually he didn't. At the time, so if you go to the Elmer L. Anderson Library at the University of Minnesota, there are archives there. So as you know, Susan Pettis and all of those people, they were watching Holt and they were like, no way, this is not acceptable. And they're, you know, like writing about it. And it was pretty horrifying what they were doing, you know, just like matching these children to anybody who would take them, not screening anybody. And just like the proxy adoption thing was crazy. And like the children who were murdered by their father, that was through Holt. Those Supple children. And I made a list. I don't have my blog up anymore, but I had made a list of the children who were killed, the international adoptees who were killed by their parents. And I think it was like 13 or something.
No, I mean, I think these agencies are happy to take credit for placing children with families, but they're not willing to take the responsibility for any of the screening and kind of any atrocity that's coming after it. And I think that's a problem. It's more like a business. It's more like a marketing business for themselves. So yeah. I gotta tell you, I mean, some of these stories that are coming up, Jane, even your own, it's sort of, there's not a lot of, I don't feel a lot of trust for my own personal records. Like, for me, it was, this is my story, and my story is written down, so it's fact, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just hearing your story, and last night T had me watch First Person Plural. So he and I were talking about like how I was crying through it, but also realizing these are not facts. Like, and that's actually kind of unnerving, right?
So true. You just watched that movie? You just watched it yesterday? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. I remember when I watched that.
Yeah.
I cried buckets. I was sick, and I was also just like crying buckets. It was like so emotionally exhausting. Deanne is great. She's and her latest movie, Geographies of Kinship, like, I thank her so much because I feel like she really laid down history for us as the community or diaspora that we are. She did such a great job.
She's incredible. I've been trying so hard to contact her because a professor of mine at Sarah Lawrence took Korean language lessons with her in college, and so she and I have been like digging through emails trying to find her email because she is just an incredible documentarian. and watching first person flow for me, even though I'm not adopted, like all of the pictures of her as a child were shockingly similar to pictures I've seen of Amma as a child in Illinois. And so it was this weird awakening for me too.
You had that hair and lip gloss, huh?
Oh, I had perms because that was the time when you and I are the same age, I think. So that was the time for me, is like big hair and perms.
Yeah. That was a lot of work, wasn't it?
No, trying to be white was really hard because I was not good at it.
Well, yeah, it's exhausting, isn't it?
Phew.
Yeah, those were the days. So can I tell you a horrifying story about Korea Social Service?
Please.
So Korea Social Service, okay, so like I'm going to bring it all home now to Christianity. So my adoption agency is Lutheran Social Service, and they're paired with Korea Social Service in Korea. And they brought to my church refugees and adoptees. Yay, here I am. So they kind of like had us in the refugee adoptee category, which is kind of interesting, I think, from a legal point of view, because I think there's a thing where refugees can travel without passports. They can travel with just travel documents, right? And so like most of us don't have passports. We didn't enter the United States on a passport. We entered on this like weird travel certificate.
Yeah.
Which is like screwed up if you think about it, because we came from a country which, although a dictatorship, did have a functioning government. So why did the United States even let us in?
Yeah.
With that, like we should have had a passport. Like what the heck?
I know. There's a state government official who's shopping around for children. You would think part of that would be making sure that these children have certain legal rights.
Right, and that they meet certain legal criteria to enter the United States.
Yeah, they're not interested in that.
Yeah, just like, get them out. Okay, so here's my screwed up story about Lutheran Social Service and KSS. So I have many brothers and one brother and lots of sisters in Korea, and two of my sisters are birth mothers. And between the two of those sisters, they have sent 3 children for adoption. And so my oldest sister, yeah, man, I was so drunk when I found this out. So it was hard. So my oldest sister, I finally convinced her that we should go to KSS to see what we can find out about finding her daughter. So KSS is the same agency that I was sent out of. And so she's like, okay, what do I got to do? So she's Korean. Okay, well, why don't you call them and make an appointment? So she called them to make an appointment. I'm so glad you're filming this because I've been wanting to tell this to people now. Okay, so she called to make an appointment, and she gave her daughter's name and the date of birth. And she called them up and she said, I'm looking for my daughter. This is her name. This is her date of birth. And they said, okay, we'll look at our files and we'll contact you back. They called her back 30 minutes later and told her the fake name and the fake birthday that they sent out her child under.
Oh, wow.
So what does that mean? That means that there's like adoptees have been like whispering about this for a long time. It's like, we think there might be 2 files. There are. I know it for sure. There are. Because if it's not a double file and if it's not completely deliberate and organized, they cannot find that information in 30 minutes, can they?
Wow.
And so okay. So we made our appointment and went there, and I just pretended to be Korean and didn't say anything, and I just sat there. And in the meantime, we found out that she had been sent to South Dakota, and I had gotten her file number or something like that. And they told us, okay, well, you want to do a search for her, we can try to make contact with the agency in the United States, and it's going to take us like 6 months to a year. And that was like 10 years ago.
Oh my God.
And they never did jack shit. But luckily, in the meantime, I had a friend in South Dakota, and I'm like, okay, so I know my niece went to South Dakota. So who did the Korean adoptions there? Well, luckily there was only one. It was LSS in South Dakota, Lutheran Social Service.
Okay.
So I contacted them, and they were great. I was like, here's the file number. This is the person I'm looking for. And they were great. I filled out the form, offered information. I got my sister to help me with it. We sent it back. And I think within about like a week or two of us having sent this, they had forwarded it to my niece's adoptive parents, and they had decided to contact us back. So it turned out great. But meanwhile, KSS was like sitting on their butt over here for the past decade doing nothing.
Yeah. It's still very murky. And it's very live. Like, it's not Holt from way back when. It continues to be shrouded in this mystery, or these, I mean, purposeful, right? Diversions from the truth. That's creepy.
Yeah, it's totally deliberate fabrication. And like on my own records as well, it's totally deliberately fabricated. And there's no reason that they ever had to fabricate that, because my mom, bless her heart, dropped me off herself. It's like, there's no reason that they have to lie about my siblings' names, or that, I mean, I guess the reason why is because they want to make sure that I get sent for adoption. So like, I should not be an American citizen even, because in order to get an orphan visa, you have to meet some orphan requirements. So the kid who is living at home until the day their own mother puts them on the airplane, that would be me, is not an orphan. Okay, so I got my visa so I could emigrate from Korea and immigrate to the United States based on fraudulent documents. I should not be an American citizen. I should not have even gotten in the country.
Was your mother, what was the intention for your mother when she did that?
When she sent us for adoption?
Mm-hmm.
Well, to, have a wonderful life with the family that they showed her, which was some family in Texas where the mother was a lawyer, I think.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't the family they sent us to.
Yeah. They do that. I don't get, because are they trying to keep a tie from you from Korea to America, so that no one can kind of connect the dots? Is that what it is?
Well, I think so. And I think, I mean, like from my mother's perspective, her husband, my dad, was a construction worker. So in my American family, my adoptive dad was a factory worker. So like, if you're going to send your kid to the moon in a place where like the streets are paved with gold, are you going to be like, well, a factory worker is way better than a construction worker? No, it's the same, right?
Yeah.
They got to sell this mom a good story. And so I looked at the relinquished documents, because I can read Korean now. I looked at the relinquishment document, which by the way has no legal meaning. It's just like fake. It says, for the child's happiness. Yeah. For the sake of the child's happiness, I get rid of my parental rights, and I promise I will not change my mind. Something like that. So it's just lies, pants on fire. Like they always say, our records burned in a fire. I'm like, pants on fire.
But I have the same story. Like I was apparently intuitive, whether or not this is true, but I've absolutely heard the same story. The
fire?
Yeah. There's a lot of fires in Korea. Like, I just want to say, the whole place must be made out of wood with wildfires every year.
Yeah, I know.
Like, it's insane.
They just spray that in asbestos, like the straw roof house. They just spray that down with asbestos.
And they put all the files right next to the thatch, right next to the
The reason I'm sort of in this is because of a story that happened to my just before I got to college. And I don't know if you want to sort of talk about the DNA test we did, and just sort of introduce that. Because I'm interested to know in what Jane thinks about, the story in general, and whether or not it like fits into this larger conversation of like identity for adoptees.
Yeah, so maybe I could put it in context. So one of the things that's so interesting listening to your story and actually other Korean adoptee stories is there were just things I accepted, right? There's things that were true, like my adoption papers. They're facts. There was a fire. We can't go back. So there's certain truths that at least I was raised on. And so ironically, one of the things I never really questioned very much was my DNA. I was like, I'm Korean. This is what it is. I mean, I always wondered if I was like a GI's kid or not, but This is all I got. I have no records other than that, other than what was sent with me. So my husband actually got me a DNA test, and so I took it, and it was entertaining to me just because I'm going to be South Korean, right? What else could I possibly be? And when the test came back, it was X percentage Chinese, X percentage Vietnamese, X percentage Mongolian,
Japanese too.
Japanese too, and 100% not South Korean, not even North Korean. And we just thought that was really funny, just how completely, I don't know, wrong it was. But we had no basis to really know this, but it was just very laughable because it just really seemed like they didn't have a good database. So, but I think this to me was very funny. Like I just found it entertaining, but I think my son really took to heart, and it kind of, from what I've seen, it has launched him into this question of personal identity and genealogy, and you can take it from there too.
We can laugh about it now, and like we can assert now that like, oh, 23, no, it was MyHeritage. Definitely doesn't have like a good Asian genealogy department. And you know, we really did have to sit down and have a lot of conversations about it early on, I do remember. And one of the striking things for me, other than just the result of the test in general, was that very quickly I was like, hey, what would grandma and grandpa think about this? And you sort of said like they would, yeah, her parents, adopted parents. And you very clearly said to me, they're not going to care. And I was like, I feel like that's not true. They went through this whole adoption process to like get their own child from South Korea, and like, you know, they raised you. So like in my very innocent mind, I was like, that should be important. But the next time we saw them, like we told them about it, and I could, that nothing, just absolutely nothing on the faces. They're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so I just wanted to know what you think about that, because that's, you know, kind of a really big part of why I'm talking to you in the first place.
Wow, that's really amazing. Well, I guess, okay, so like, as you know, it's about the database, right?
Yes.
Like yeah, so maybe for the sake of listeners, Jong Sook, do you want to explain like how the database works, like getting people, like, I don't know exactly, I just know it's sort of like.
Sure. I mean, I only know it somewhat simplistically too. There, any of these DNA testing, genealogy testing things are only as good as their database, and they don't actually control their own database. They actually borrow from one another's. And so one of the things T was referencing is if most of their database and most of their tests are coming from European countries, because they want to know how Irish they are, whether or not they're German, their data may be very robust in that area, but I don't think a lot of Asian countries have a lot of that, and I'm not entirely sure why. So I think it's just a weakness in their database.
So do you get updates? Like, do they send you an update saying like, you can roll the dice again and see how Korean you are now?
Of course I'm sure they do, but I ignore it because I think it's too much data to give a company.
Well, I think like that kind of brings into question like what is Korean anyways. So like going back to like all the nationalist stuff about like being called back to the motherland and all of that stuff. Like there's like this like really ethnic nationalism going on, right? And I think that we kind of forget that the nation state is sort of a new invention, and for thousands and thousands of years there's all this migration. So even Korean people know that some of our ancestors came from the area that is now Vietnam. So I also have, like in my DNA, I've got like some Vietnam in there. And then of course, you know, we were colonized by Japan, and Japan is very close. And we think that, like Koreans think that Japanese royalty is actually Korean people. You know, so there's all this mixing going on. And then like from China, of course, there's all the people from China, and or you know, like the area that is China, and we know like up in the border there, like there are Korean people who mixed with Russian people. So there's like all different ways that Korean people look. I think it's a lot more fluid than we think it is. Like now we're in this kind of frame of nation state, but it's like way more fluid than that.
Yeah.
So, but like Asian America, like Manuel, I have no idea. Like Asian America totally confuses me.
Well, we say it as one concept, but it has,
it's so diverse.
Yeah, it's bigger than America. And yet we try to contain, in America, we try to contain it as a monolith.
Jane, do you know about the Side by Side project? You heard of that?
I've seen it, yeah. Is Glenn Morey's
Glenn
project?
Morey. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he's a great guy. That was really a big part of my research since the moment I started, because that's the first outlet for me where I could really hear like tons of adoptee voices, just uninterrupted, full testimonies. And that's been really rewarding. And in particular, it brought up a lot of stories from orphans who were never adopted. And this sort of group that I had never even considered before. Like, of course I'm studying adoptees, but what about the children who didn't actually get to go through that process? And there's this one quote in particular that that's really been guiding me through a lot of work. And it's, simply because of how shocking it is to me. And I'm just going to read it. And I would love if you guys could just give me your quick opinion. I'm also going to put it in the chat so we can read it. Those adoptees that think that their life is really sad and unfortunate, oh my goodness, no. That is not true at all. Those of you who feel like they were not fortunate to be adopted into the family that they dreamed of, let it go and just appreciate it. Because there are a lot of kids out there who will not have that opportunity ever. Their life is very limited. There is no future for them. And so hearing this for the first time, after spending months and months of engrossing myself in adoptee trauma and adoptee stories, it was kind of incredible. And I'm not sure what to think of it. So what do you two feel?
I don't know. What does Hyun-Soo O'Callaghan think about that? What do those Supple kids think? This person obviously thinks like adoption is when you get to go overseas and all your stuff is paid for and you get to live in a nice big house and people treat you well and blah, 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 blah. And who cares that you lost your Korean identity and you can't speak Korean because you got all this nice stuff in return? I mean, it's kind of like dueling anecdotes. I think it depends on who you ask, right? Like everybody has an individual experience, and maybe statistically, things kind of level out one way, but that doesn't, like, if all of the adoptions in the world turn out to be great, that doesn't change the fact that Hyun-Soo O'Callaghan is dead and he was killed by his adoptive father. Like that person who grew up in the orphanage, like, well, orphanage is always like 1,000 times like worse than being adopted, no matter how bad your situation is. Like, I just feel like that's so simplistic and reductionist. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that, of course, like growing up in an orphanage is an ideal situation, but being adopted by people who abuse you also is not.
I wonder if there was a construct where an orphanage wasn't a gateway to adoption, if it was really meant to be a place to raise children, meaning that the Korean government kind of said, listen, we're going to stop. The orphanages are a place to leave your children, but it's not going to be this doorway to adoption. But do you think that it would sort of change what an orphanage did for children versus trying to groom them for adoption?
Well, I don't know really very well about it right now, but I think that is the situation in many orphanages now, and that's not a good situation either.
Right, because then they're not prepared for the children that don't get adopted, right?
Well, I mean, they're kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because we don't have real social work in Korea. So the thing is that if this child is there, somebody should be calling the parent every week, every couple of weeks, giving them an update, asking them, how are you doing? Can we connect you to resources so you can come and get your kid? Can we have some visits every weekend so this child can be reintegrated into your family? And like, what is the plan and blah, blah, blah. But no, they don't want to do that. Why? Because children get upset. Like if their moms and dads have left them there and they come back later, the children are naturally mad at their moms and dads for leaving them there. And then there are some behavior problems, and the orphanage people don't want to deal with it. So the children neither go for adoption, nor do they get reunited with their parents. They're just stuck. So there's something really wrong about that.
I find that in all of my work, it's incredible to me how unpublicized a lot of these things are. right?
Mm.
And so a big reason why I contacted you in the first place is that hearing something like the amendment to the special law in a larger discourse where adoptees and orphans really don't speak a lot, like they aren't the primary voices on adoption studies, you know, that's hearing a law forced by like track and you is just an incredible idea. So this quote for me is just a part of that larger discourse of like the varied range of voices that adoptees have and what they use with it.
This is lateral violence, actually, right? Where like adoptees are like, like orphans and adoptees, like whose life was first? No, my life was first. No, my like that's lateral violence. Like, why can't we just be like, okay, well, that sucked. So how can we make it be just better for all of us?
Well,
That's all.
we're on the same plane. We're on the same plane, I think, honestly. Like we're all thrust into a situation where the outcomes were kind of out of our control. And we've got gripes. And they're legitimate. I think to your point, Jane, my gripe isn't with being adopted, or it's more about the system that happens afterwards, the system that allows this to perpetuate. And I've always considered myself, you know, it's a flip of a coin that I got adopted.
Yeah.
So I don't feel different than that person who wasn't adopted. I feel very much just on the same plane, and just, I got a different roll of the dice. I really did.
Yeah. And not only like that you got adopted, but who you got adopted to.
Yeah. No, I think you're really.
Yeah, it's all just like a crapshoot. Like for me, I know that. So I found out when I renewed my visa the first time in Korea that I was adopted to the Netherlands and I got Dutch citizenship. That's what I found out. Yeah.
Wow.
So I was like, so I went there and I had wrongly signed up for my visa using my real family papers because I had already been reunited.
Yeah.
And then they caught it in Korea. They didn't catch it at the Chicago consulate when I applied for it first, but they caught it in Korea and they were like, your birthday doesn't match. So what's up? and it doesn't, because my Korean birthday was different than my birthday on my passport. So they're like, okay, well, you got to go to your adoption agency and get your papers from there. So I did, and that's when I got my papers saying that I was Dutch. So what I found out, so this is about like rolling the dice.
Yeah.
So they said, KSS said that there were 4 girls with the same name, and 2 were sent to Denmark, and 2 were sent to the United States, 1 was sent to the Netherlands, and 1 was sent to Denmark.
Oh my God.
And they had mixed up our papers.
What was your real name versus your Korean orphanage name?
My real name is Jong Sook Nee, and the difference is I have Hanja. I have Korean characters that my family, or Chinese characters that my family gave me. And then in the orphanage, they kept it Jong Sook Nee, but they removed the Chinese characters. You know, we're all alone. It's so sad. Like, you look at a real Korean family register, you're connected to all these people. And all of us, even if we have siblings on our orphan papers, are all alone. And most Korean people have never seen such a document before. It like makes them shit their pants. They're like, what is this? How can you be all alone?
Yeah.
But like, so this brings me back to like orphans.
Yeah.
So some orphanages, not all, but like I know Jane White's orphanage in Jecheon, she is not allowing those orphans, I hate calling them orphans, she's not allowing those people to see their own papers. And the reason why is because she says she doesn't want them to resent their parents more. But that's not for her to decide, right? Like,
no, it's not.
They're not even adopted people. They're like regular Korean citizens, and she won't show them their stuff. So I feel like the right to identity is kind of like the first place where we intersect, where we could be working together. And the reason I know this is because I used to live over there, and we invited some of these people who had grown up in that orphanage to our home, and they told us about it. And they told us there was they made a huge stink at the National Human Rights Commission about child abuse, and filed a huge report. And yeah, like there was totally abuse there. Like nobody's saying that was like a cakewalk, but like it sucks for everybody, right?
For both of you, you both, this actually is pretty relevant. You've both changed your names as you've grown up. You know, after like having your name forcibly changed by coming to America, et cetera, you both at some point, you know, became or gave yourself the names that you have now. And so, especially Jane, for you, when I read that passage about how you changed your name to Jane Jeong Trenka in Language of Blood, it made me think of, you know, the different ways that adoptees do actually sort of claim their own identity.
Well, okay, so I gotta admit that I'm kind of over the name thing. Like when I wrote Language of Blood, it was really important. It was really, really important to me. It was so important. And like the whole time I grew up, it was so important. But I'm kind of over it now. I've kind of come to this point because I'm like almost 50 now, where I feel like a name is something not for, well, it's for me, of course, but it's also for other people. Because you want to make friends and you want to have people remember who you are and so on and so forth. And so if I'm speaking English with someone, then my name is Jane. And if I'm speaking Korean, then I use my Korean name because it's easier for other people. And also, frankly, in Korea, it's easier for the computer. If my name fits in those 3 boxes, it's way easier for the computer. And just like, there's all kinds of screwed up iterations of my English name that happen if in Korea. It's just terrible. So it's just easier to use my Korean name.
So when I grew up Amy Percher. So it was always very disarming when someone would talk to me on the phone, but then see me, because I am not Amy Percher. I'm not what they think. I'm extremely Midwest. I'm a Midwest girl. So when I went to college, I got very tired of always having to deal with that kind of dissonance people had with how I sounded and what my name was versus what I looked like. So when I was in college, I reclaimed my adoptive name, Jong Sook. And I just started telling people, oh, that's my name. And it was very accepted, right, at college. They're like, sure, yeah. Because Jong made way more sense than Amy. Amy was always like, what? But Jong, they're like, yeah, sure, no, that's who you are. So it was very weird because it was very accepting. That's what I loved about college. But then when I changed my name legally in college, and that was a really big deal with my adopted family. But kind of like you, like it's now who I am, and it's whenever I go back, I'm Amy. And I was about ready to say I have to be, but I'm actually really okay with it because very much like you, I think you describe it well, which is it's the name that they gave me, and it's a name that, you know, really means a lot to them. And to me, it doesn't matter enough. I'm not going to insist on them calling me Jong. Like, it's not, because this is something that they need to do. So it's just not that important to my identity. Though I can still claim it in other aspects of my life. Like I've conquered it. Like the fact that everyone in my adult life calls me Jong. I'm okay because I can go home. It's not destabilizing to return to that name. It's not regressive. It's actually very much what I claim and kind of how I manage my life with them, which is I know they don't care about my I know they don't care about my DNA test. I know they don't. Like if I ever had if I had a Korean family and I had a chance to meet them, I know it would be deeply threatening to them. And my son calls me Amma, and I think I don't know about you, Jane, but one of the things that for me, I've always been very afraid to go back to Korea, very afraid to go back to an adoption agency, but my heart really goes out for kind of that, this children in need, they really do. That being said, I did consider adoption a long time ago because it was just, I wanted to, like, I felt like I could be in a better position to help someone transitioning, you know, from that environment to mine, only because I would have this shared experience like them. But I ultimately decided I couldn't do it. I needed to create my own family because I don't have one. So for me, part of my identity was having my own son. And it was really important to me and to have my own child that was my own blood. But I think T was really the first time I had family for me. And it was really deeply important for me to have my own son, my own child. He just happened to be a boy.
So much love poured at you.
Well, I was wondering if it's similar. How is it with you and your daughter? And
yeah, well, I really wanted to have a biological child.
me too.
But anyway, I think it's my daughter really changed my life in ways that are incredibly difficult. Like I waited a long time to have kids because I thought, well, this is going to complicate life. I don't want to complicate life. But then, you know, like tick tock, the clock was ticking. So I finally did it. And like life is so hard, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's worse.
No.
Or I should say, like life is hard, but it's better in some ways. Like I feel very challenged to do things that, like, no way would I be doing what I'm doing right now if I didn't have my kid. I would be doing something way easier where I could be way lazier. But you know, I gotta work hard.
Yeah, I know. And you have a partner in life, good and bad. That's the way I felt when I had T.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to convince her we're a team. Just, you know, I just imagine like there's this community of people all who have kids the same age, and that we would exchange childcare because we're all tired.
I would do that, except for you're in Korea, so I'm not so sure that would.
Well, come visit. Come visit. So you haven't been to Korea before?
We were supposed to this fall.
Yeah.
Dang it.
And then all of this happened. So
Pandemic. And America's so bad, but this is going to be my big trip. I was going to do it. I was going to return to the motherland.
But you know, like if you want to wait out the pandemic and then come, please come and visit us.
will do. Thank you so much, both of you, for speaking with me. This was super insightful and also just a great conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Manuel. It's been great to visit with you, and you're just like a TV host already. It was great to meet you. It was a pleasure meeting you, Jong Sook.
Yes.
So seriously, come and visit us.
I will.
They're constructing this like Buddhist temple stay thing like pretty close to our house.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So like I imagine telling all of my friends like, enjoy the temple stay, and then we're gonna come and visit you.
That's pretty
incredible.
Awesome. We'll do that.
Okay, take care. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hey, bye.